So this morning I want to talk about pride, which of course brings us back to our old friend, the ego. And I hope you're not getting tired of me talking about it, but I talk about it so often because I really think that many, if not most, paths of our lives, especially where we get into stickiness, lead back to the ego. So here we go again with more ego. And this morning, there's this beautiful convergence. Let me just preface what I'm going to say this morning between wisdom traditions across the world, they all across time, across geography, because they often speak to us about the same universal truths. And this morning, I want to share an African proverb which says this quote, "If you are filled with pride, you will have no room for wisdom. If you are filled with pride, you will have no room for wisdom." And as I ran across that, it really jumped out at me, and I thought that this could have easily have been spoken by the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree 2,500 years ago, because it really captures, really in this one sentence, one of the most practical, I think, practical and transformative insights to those of us on this path, which is this: that the ego's inflation, when we get caught up in it and inflating it, it really becomes an enemy of genuine understanding. It really becomes an enemy of seeing things clearly. And so, from a secular Buddhist perspective, and it's not intended as some sort of moral scolding. It's not a finger wagging at us for feeling good about ourselves, because we certainly want to do that. But it is a pretty precise observation about how our minds work. And and more importantly, it's an observation about how our minds stop working skillfully when pride takes the wheel, when pride takes over. So let me begin with a little background about what I think pride actually does to us internally. And again, there's nothing wrong with pride. It's just that when we begin to get too caught up in it or believe our own press, then it can get us into trouble. In Buddhist psychology, pride, the word is mana, M-A-N-A, in ancient Pali. And that, by the way, that's also translated as arrogance or conceit. It's considered one of the fundamental fetters that bind us to suffering if we don't manage it skillfully. But we don't need to just accept this because the Buddha said it. We can observe this directly in our own experience. When pride arises, we want to notice, pay attention to what happens. And what happens, I think, is the mind contracts around this fixed image of ourselves, something to the effect like, I am this, or I have accomplished this, or look at me, look how special I am, or I am better than, smarter than, more expensive, more experienced than you, et cetera, et cetera. And in that moment of contraction, when we sort of pull into ourselves and pull into the ego, crucial things are lost, two particularly: humility and openness. And I hope to make the case for that this morning. And the analogy I like here is that the mind becomes then like a cup that's already full to the brim. It's going to overflow. There's no room for wisdom in the cup. No matter how fine the tea is that's being offered, there's just no room for it. And this is not just an abstraction. Think of the last time you entered a conversation already convinced that you were right about whatever it is you were saying. Absolutely right. Indisputably right. How much in that conversation did you actually hear from the other person? I was reflecting on this in my own life. How humble or open were we in that conversation? I'm right, my mind's closed. You know that old saying, my mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts. How much new information am I able to absorb when I go into it with my mind made up? Pride creates this perceptual filter that only allows that which confirms our existing point of view, our existing self image, and it tends to deflect or not hear everything else. We psychologists call this confirmation bias, which is, we only hear things which confirm what we already believe or want to believe. And in practical terms, we really just become stupid, because not because we lack intelligence, but because we have barricaded ourselves behind this wall of self-importance, of this idea, this fixed idea that I'm important, my opinions are important, my opinions are correct. The Buddhist insight here into anatta, this notion that this ego is not a fixed permanent entity, but an always ever changing process in flux is directly relevant here. Because pride requires this solid, unchanging sense of self, which attaches to things like I am this, I am wise, I am accomplished, I am worthy, I am blah, blah, blah. The implication being that whatever I am now is that I'm fixed in that role. That's part of my identity. It's part of what the ego identifies with. But when we look closely with careful attention, especially during our meditation when we get quiet, we find that I, that what we think is that fixed self is more like the river than the rock. It's flowing, it's changing, it's shifting. It's composed of countless conditions and influences, and none of which we can ultimately claim as mine in any kind of permanent sense. It's ever in flux. Now, this is not some depressing realization, at least I hope it doesn't land on you that way. It's profoundly liberating because when we loosen our grip on this fixed self image with all its fixed ideas and fixed opinions and being right about everything and being self important, we suddenly have room for more openness and more humility. Because remember, I said that the enemy of this of openness, humility is this fixed self. We have more curiosity. We have more of the don't know mind that our Zen friends talk about. We have room to learn, room to grow, room to be wrong. How about that? To be surprised, to change. So this African proverb that I quoted at the outset in the Buddhist teaching really arrive at the same destination, albeit by different paths. And here's sort of the takeaway that I want you to think about for today. The fullness of self-importance creates an emptiness of understanding. In other words, when we're full of self-importance, there's no space for understanding, for seeing things clearly. It just bumps it right off the table. While the emptiness or absence of self-importance creates a fullness for wisdom to get a foothold. So that's kind of abstract teaching. So let's talk about it in sort of a practical way, just to see if we can put a little more perspective on it. Um, think about let's think about you're at work or in a project or and a colleague offers a suggestion or a suggestion for an improvement or a change in something you're working on. Now, if my pride is running the show, my first initial response is to reject the suggestion, to feel defensive, to think to myself something like, they don't understand what I've been doing. I've been working on this for months. Who are they to suggest changes? I know this inside out, blah, blah, blah. So the suggestion is rejected before I even hear it. And I'm just not open to hearing it. The pride has just got me in a lockdown. So you can see that accepting it in that instance would require admitting that my approach might be incomplete, my approach might be inadequate, my approach might be less than perfect, and the ego does not want to hear that. Or similarly, consider how it might come up in relationships. How many arguments persist not because of the issue at hand so much, the content, but the process, because neither person is willing to back down. We just dig our heels in. Pride can transform a simple disagreement, let's say about household chores and who does the most, into some sort of battle for existential validation. Like, by golly, if you don't acknowledge that I, clean up the dishes more than you, then you've invalidated me. You've challenged my ego. But what about if I respond to that with this willingness? What if I respond to say, you're right, I haven't thought of it that way, or you're right, I kind of was missed that. That can be almost physically painful when pride has inflated myself to the point where any concession feels like it's going to just wipe out my ego. It's just like I can't go there. Okay, that's what I mean about pride closing out any room for wisdom, any room for hearing an alternative point of view. And when we sit to do our meditation, pride shows up in more subtle ways, but it still shows up like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for years. I should be beyond this. I shouldn't be distracted. What's wrong? Blah, blah, blah. My practice is deeper than most other people, so it should be better than them. These thoughts are pride wearing spiritual clothing. They're just as effective. The pride is just as effective then at blocking genuine insight as any worldly arrogance might do. So it just sneaks in all over the place, which is why I tend to always come back to the ego. I referenced this a moment ago, but the Zen tradition, excuse me, I think captures this beautifully with this concept of beginner's mind. The recognition that expertise and our attachment to that expertise, whatever it is, me as a psychologist, my expertise can become its own obstacle when it hardens into my identity, when I can't be open to alternatives. When my expertise, whatever your expertise is, as you define it, becomes its own obstacle when it hardens into identity. And from a secular Buddhist perspective, the antidote here is not to be self-deprecating. It's not false modesty, oh, gee, shucks, whatever. The Buddha didn't teach us to think poorly of ourselves. He asked us to think clearly about ourselves. Humility in this context, though, let's be careful. It's not a moral achievement to add to the things we're proud of. It's not like I wear my humility like a badge of honor, which would, of course, defeat the entire purpose of cultivating humility if I just use it as another thing to inflate myself. Okay. It is a practice of accurate seeing. Humility means recognizing every moment that our knowledge, our identity, our position, our ideas are always partial, that our perspective is always situational, that the person standing in front of us, regardless of their credentials, their status, their appearance, even if we think it's lower than ours, may hold a piece of understanding that would help us. It means holding our opinions, and here comes my favorite metaphor, with an open hand rather than a clenched fist. Holding my identity with an open hand rather than a clenched fist. And the good news is that practically, with awareness, we can cultivate this stance. For example, in conversation, pause before responding. Listen with an open mind to what the other person might have to say to us. Notice our impulse to be defensive. That is a red flag. When I start to get defensive, I guarantee you the ego is underneath that doing its mischief. So when I notice the impulse to defend, to correct, to demonstrate my expertise, ego, 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 right down the line. And we don't need to suppress this. I just need to see it. I just need to not get invested in it and identified with it and attached to it. That moment of seeing clearly, oh, there's the ego again. It's just a small gap. It's just a little opening. But wisdom can enter through that opening. We notice when the mind constructs narratives of superiority or the inferiority of the other person. That's the same mechanism. Both are expressions of pride. I'm superior, you're inferior. Both are my mind measuring myself against others rather than simply showing up with a certain humility. The proverb says that pride leaves no room for wisdom. The implication is that wisdom needs space. How true is that? And this aligns perfectly with the Buddhist understanding of the mind's natural capacity. When we are not cluttered and filled up with noise and self-referential thinking, the mind is clearer, it's more responsive, it's more perceptive, and it's more open. We notice more, we understand more, we grow more, we connect more authentically with others and with the reality of our situation. And this is not just some distant abstract goal reserved just for monks or scholars or people living in caves in the Himalayas. It's available to each one of us every moment when we are willing to set down the burden of being so important, self-important, and simply pay attention to what is happening. I set aside my agenda of being so important and so ego driven to just trying to pay attention to what's happening right now. And this is where the wisdom traditions of the African proverb and the teachings from Asia agree on this fundamental point, that the door to understanding opens inward, and it can't open if we're standing in the way of it. If we're standing behind the door and it can't open, it will not open to understanding. It opens only inward. Now, this invitation is simple as much of the teachings are, but it is not easy. The ego is always nipping at our heels. And again, I don't mean to demonize it. We need it, we rely on it, but we have to manage it skillfully. It is a sneaky little devil, and it will get away from us if we don't pay attention. We have to notice where pride has filled the teacup of our minds. And then with gentleness, kindness, and without self judgment, this is really important. We just pour a little bit of that pride out. We make some room for wisdom. And might just be surprised by what fills the space when we do that, when we can pour a little bit of that pride out of the teacup. So those are some thoughts on pride and wisdom this morning.